Welcome, Financial Planning World Community. Dan Davis, co-founder, coming to you with a very unique guest today, Carlo Sanfilippo. And what makes Carlo unique is many things, but the thing that we're talking about today is his perspective as a seller of a financial practice. All the practice information that I see is really comes at us from the buyer's perspective. So I'm really excited to have been involved with Carlo in this acquisition because we started probably about 2 years ago, a little bit more than 2 years ago. Tell us a little bit about your perspective of how that thought process started for you.
Well, you know, we knew each other before, right? So through Financial Planning Association, and for the years I had known I needed a succession plan, and I saw an email from you for Financial Planning World. And I'm like, all right, I know Dan, you had a good reputation, so I reached out to you, and then we just started that conversation more around succession planning, and then some of the things that you were offering advisors as part of kind of a suite of services, and as well as an opportunity to kind of connect with other advisors. So initially, that was my initial interest.
You know, when we were doing this pre-video discussion, one of the things that you said is that the things that you did to build a successful lifestyle practice were key pieces of why the transition went so well. Speak into that a little bit.
Yeah, so as you know, I wrote a book about some pretty big things that happened in my life about a decade ago. So I had a financial planning practice for 27 years. I started in the early 90s, or the 90s, and 10 years ago, 11 years ago, I went through this period of time where, you know, I was going along and I was, you know, living the American dream, running my financial planning practice, and I went through a 3.5-year period where my mom died, my dad died, my stepdad died, and I got divorced. And so all those things kind of like knocked me back on my heels and made me start really thinking about my own life and how I wanted to live. And then I realized that during that process, because of everything I was going through, I had a good team, and I realized how much they were able to handle and do without me being there. So when I showed up, I did what I was good at in terms of relationship management. And actually during that time period, the business grew. And as I was kind of coming out of that fog of a really dark time, I started thinking about how I wanted to live my personal life, and that I wanted to really maximize that aspect, the efficiency aspect of my business. And so at that time, you know, technology, a lot of things were coming in place that, frankly, a lot of advisors were scared of. You kept hearing about the fear of robo-advisors and the fear of technology taking things or hurting our opportunity as advisors. And I looked at it as an opportunity that if, you know, big corporations could outsource and eliminate jobs by the thousands, I could use the same technology as a small business to make my practice more efficient, make my life easier, the life of my staff easier, so we would have more time to spend with our clients. And that, you know, ironically, like the more time I spent doing the things I wanted, the more time I spent working on efficiency, increased the quality of the time I had with my clients, which then allowed me to keep working the way I wanted to and growing the business faster than I ever had before. And so those things of empowering my staff, maximizing technology, improved the quality of the services I was providing for my clients, empowered my staff to be an important part of that relationship.
Right on.
And even though it wasn't my vision 10 years ago to retire at the time that I did, those things made it easier for me to step away because we had very high quality relationships, and we had systems and processes in place that the clients liked, and it just worked well for everyone.
One of the phrases you used when we were talking is that you were looking for more meaning in your life. And having read your book, Afterlife, Waking Up from My American Dream, if you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. No matter what stage you're at on your path, it will cause you to pause and think about the journey you're on? Are you on the right path? Are there things that you could do that shifts? But getting back to the question, so tell me a little bit about how you were pursuing meaning and how that affected your overall decision.
Well, my parents both died. They were only 72 when they passed away, or all three of them, my mom, dad, and stepdad. And while that's, they were 70, but they still, I thought they would all live a lot longer. And they all died in a way where I had time with them. I had a year and a half, 2 years with them before they passed away. So I had a lot of really meaningful conversations about their lives and what they had done and hadn't done. And it made me think about my own life. Like, well, what am I not doing that I really want to do? What am I not experiencing? What kind of example am I setting for my kids? And that really woke me up to the brevity of life, and that ultimately I was spending all my time working, and then when I wasn't working, I was doing all the American dream stuff of taking care of houses and taking care of my stuff and just doing things that really weren't meaningful for me.
Understood.
And so I just really realized I wanted to simplify the things in my life so that I had more time to spend exploring things that were really more meaningful for me.
So what are a couple of those things? I mean, I know them because we're hanging out a lot, but tell our audience.
Yeah, so when I was in high school and college, I studied German, and I had a chance to do some internships and exchange trips. And sometimes when you're a kid, you don't really appreciate the things you're good at or the things you like. You just kind of blow them off as like, well, that's just what I'm doing. And then, so fast forward to 2016, I'm past my divorce and things have settled down, and I decided I can still speak German. I want to go back and take my kids to Germany and explore this and get to use this language that I spent 8 years studying. And while I was there, we kept seeing Roman ruins. And my dad's side of the family is Italian, and he'd always talked about going to Italy and exploring that, and he never got to go, even though his parents were from there. And so on that trip, my boys and I decided, well, next year we're going to go to Italy.
Cool.
And on the plane ride home, I decided, well, maybe I'll learn Italian. So I dove in and started studying Italian. I started studying history and art history and all these things because we were going to go to all these cities in Italy that I really didn't know anything about. And as I've poured through probably 50 history books in the last 5 years.
Wow.
And it just sticks in my head in a way that, sometimes you read stuff I needed to read stuff for work, a compliance manual or something, and it doesn't stick in the same way. Like, I really realized that this is something that I like and I'm good at, and so I've just dove into that, and in the process I've learned Italian. I've become an Italian citizen, and I've been over there multiple times. I've got 40 or 50 friends over there I didn't know 5-6 years ago.
Very cool.
Yeah, so and it was really it felt effortless.
Nice.
Yeah, so that's
from your perspective as someone who has transitioned from your practice to this next stage of life, what are the things that you benefited from the most or felt like went the best, or what was the most meaningful to you about the transition itself? Not necessarily from a personal life standpoint, but from a standpoint of handing the baton off.
Well, some people were surprised some clients were surprised when I said I wanted to retire. And I thought about it for a moment. I'm like, when I was 12, my dream wasn't to grow up and to talk about rates of return and future value of money and things like that. But at the same time, I was good at it and I liked it and I cared deeply about my clients. And what was meaningful for me in this process is, when you have something you've put that many hours of your life in. If you think about it, you get anyone with family or kids or whatever it is you're doing. When you trade, you're trading your time and your life for whatever it is you're doing for a living, and you're giving away. I gave away. And when you're an adult or a parent, you have to leave your 3-year-old. I can't tell how many times my kids ask me to stay at home and play. Like, I got to go, explain a living trust to someone rather than spend time with you? It's you're making that trade-off. And so I wanted it also to be meaningful. I cared about my clients. I cared about their families. I wanted to help them. And so the most beneficial part of this to me was knowing that these families I'd taken care of for so long, who would put their faith in me, and I did my best to live up to that,
right.
that honor, that they were taken care of. It wasn't an ego thing that the name of my company survived, just that the quality of the service would continue, so that the plans that we'd been working on, sometimes for almost 3 decades, would continue in a way that I felt good about. So.
One of the things I think is just a huge compliment. So you were on the focus call when one of your clients, who's now our client, made the comment that I felt comfortable that this new team was coming in because Carlo had done the research and selected them out of a due diligence process. And then his wife in a different meeting had said that Carlo's our Renaissance man. And so I think the thing on my side that really, transcended all the numbers, all the stuff, was just the meaningful relationships that you built with people, and how much easier that made us coming in, because they knew that you were moving on to the next stage, but that had done all the stuff that was necessary to get them where they were at, and that you were handing that off in a way that you had selected a team that you really cared about. The technology stuff was huge, and then Justin Dickerson coming aboard with us. I remember we had some conversations with some of your clients, and after the initial shock, their next question was, is Justin staying with? I think those are really key things. So if you're thinking this dynamically from a seller's perspective, a buyer's perspective, and at my end, the big part was Carlo's deep relationships and people caring about him. And then Justin, who was part of that team, staying with. Those to me were really key things, along with everything else that you had commented on. So what would you say, sort of in wrapping up, from a person's perspective watching, saying, someday I might be a seller, what should I be doing? How should I process this financially, emotionally, whatever?
Before I dive in, I want to add a little bit to your team. Your team is so important. I read years ago to treat your team like your A clients, and that is so important. Like that you have a team that you trust and that they trust you. And I talked earlier about the use of technology to make my life easier. I constantly was empowering Justin to do the same thing. Like anything this an app or software program should do, I want it off your plate so you have more time to think and learn and grow. And then as I learned how to use technology to be more free, I also applied that to him. And on days that, there was a couple times in January or whatever when there was a potential snowstorm moving in, and finally I just said, why don't we just work from home today? We have this disaster, the disaster plan.
Right.
We used to call that the zombie apocalypse plan, because prior to COVID, there hadn't been anything like that, or you couldn't come to the office for weeks. So I'm like, why don't we just test that thing out? And so we started doing that 2 years before COVID, so that when that disaster happened, it was really easy for us. So from a functional and practical standpoint, we were prepared, but it also made his life better. If he had a cable guy coming from between 9 and 4, he could be there, and he got everything done he needed, and I trusted him to do that. So having that high trust relationship with your team, and that they know you care about them and you care about their growth and well-being is critical, and it's got to be real, or it just doesn't work.
Right on.
What was the second part of your question?
Part of that was from a seller's perspective, what would you sort of advise them from a financial, emotional, operational, any of those components that you think are sort of like top of mind for you?
Okay. So as a seller's perspective, and a way to best prepare yourself for this, I say first and foremost, do your own financial planning. What is it you're trying to do? How much do you need to be free? And how much is it, in terms of not just the net worth or value of your business, but your own assets, and what is it you need to be able to accomplish whatever your goals are.
Right on.
And then another piece is figure out who you are outside of being a financial planner. I sort of had that thrust on me by nature of my divorce. All of a sudden, I didn't have my kids half the time. And at first, that was really hard. And I could have just filled that time up with work, but I filled it up with things that were enriching. And I began diving into and exploring who I was. And some of that I learned from watching so many clients get to retirement and not know what they wanted to do.
Yeah.
And I saw some people dive in and leave really rich lives, and even my parents, I saw them really struggling to figure out who they were and what their lives were all about when they weren't whatever their profession was.
That's awesome.
So doing your planning, and then as a piggyback on that, you all did a plan for me, because I wanted, doctors aren't supposed to be their own doctors. I wanted to see, am I just seeing what I want to see? Am I being objective on this thing? And I was happy when the numbers were really close.
Yeah.
So doing your planning, making sure your house is in order, and then really figuring out what is it you're retiring to. I think that is so critical, because if you don't, then if all your identity is wrapped up in who you are as a professional, you'll have a harder time diving into what life looks like after that.
Some of the things that Carlo was just talking about, definitely go out, read his book, because my biggest takeaway from it was to be able to see someone else's journey, and then to start think about mine parallel, and while it's not the same values, it's similar that we have values, and are we pursuing those, or are we putting things that we value aside, pursuing something else for the wrong reasons? And I think that absolutely awesome. And then I love the very diverse group of guests that you host on your podcast. So if you're into podcasts, it's The Journey. I absolutely love it, and the range of guests. I think my favorite was she was living somewhere down in Latin America, and I want to say it was Argentina, and she is an author and writer, and just had freedom. Mm-hmm. And my wife loved that one, because that was the first time she ever heard someone say publicly that, hey, as a woman, it's okay for you to travel alone. And Mary Kay loves to travel alone. So in wrapping up, I would just like to say, financial planning world, whether or not you're on the buying side, selling side, best practices is something that to me is really, really important. And that's why I had Carlo come join us, is you're not hearing much from the seller's perspective. So some key takeaways: number one, do your own financial plan. Have someone come in and do it with you. Number two is retire to something, and make sure that to is something that you're truly passionate about, that lines up with your values. Lastly, the call to action here is really simple, and it's twofold. One is introduce this to some of the other financial advisors that you know, financialplanningworld.com, or you can check out LinkedIn Financial Planning World. And two is, if you have a best practice that you think the industry could benefit from, reach out to me through the website, and I'd love for our video team to come alongside and put you up with us. Have a great rest of the day. Signing off from Financial Planning World. Carlo, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Yeah.